Super exciting. Get the lights turned on here. That'd be very nice. And we'll get rolling. Hey, last week we talked about this idea of hospitality, friendliness, and we talked about it from not a perspective of, hey, let's be better grab handers and neck huggers and baby kissers, but let's talk about being gracious and generous with Christ, and how in our lives how we treat Christ is really kind of evidence of our Christianity. And one of the things that we talked about last week is something that's kind of harsh, but it's reality, right? If we treated our friends and gave to our friends the same amount of time we gave Jesus every week, how many friends would we actually have left? The reality is, I think for most of us, it became very real that if we treated our friends the way we treated Jesus, if we gave our friends the time we gave Jesus, we wouldn't have a lot of friends. We would be considered rude and a recluse and somebody who likes to be distanced. And so we have to make sure that to be a church that's considered friendly, we've got to start by being generous and gracious to Christ first in all that we do, in our conversations, in our attitudes, in our worship. Our worship is a big thing, because I think for a lot of us, we're very selfish in worship. I don't want to sing. Who cares? Right? I can't get into worship when it's like that. Well, I don't know that it matters. I think you're talking about yourself and not about Jesus. And the reality is, unless we're spending time studying the Word and really relying on the promises of Christ, unless we know what those promises are, we don't really have His heart. And the more we understand His heart, the more we see people and love people the way that He sees them. And how in the world are we supposed to see people how Christ sees them if we have no concept of how Christ does them? That's how a lot of the message of Christ and gospel and grace gets warped. Is because I think as individuals, we don't tend to look. It's not that hard to warp it. I've shared the story about preaching out of the Book of Mormon in one of my youth groups in the past. And nobody caught it. And I actually got compliments. Way to be blasphemous and preach a heresy. It was really well done. Because for the most part, we don't spend that time. And how can we understand how Christ sees people if we don't, take the time to learn to see them? And we got to understand that Christ didn't seek to love people as some sort of ruse to draw them in. He didn't seek to love people as some sort of way to make Himself popular. It was a genuine love. It was a genuine affection for people. And so for us as Christians, if we're first generous and hospitable with Christ, we'll then, and only then, be truly hospitable with the ones that He really did come to love and to save. Because Jesus came to love and save a lot of just really odd folks. Yeah, I've seen it. It gets sent to my office every morning. But the reality is, without that understanding of how Jesus sees people, we're never going to be able to be like Him. And so we have to spend that time. And this week we're going to talk about balancing a family and how that applies. And a couple weeks ago we talked about the bad side of family. We talked about how there are a lot of people that the term family is actually a 4-letter word, right? There are people who struggle with their family, who have had most of their difficulties in life come about because of their families. And it's hard. And so when you say, hey, we're all big one happy family, some people are like, I've had family, I don't want any more, right? A lot of us, I've shared the stories about my grandmother, rest in peace, who was not a nice person. She was mean. And my wife loved her grandmother. She talks, oh, my grandmother's so great. And then my mother-in-law was like, oh, you know how grandmothers are. No, I don't. Mine was awful. And my other one, she was struck with dementia 25 years ago. Huh? I do kind of look like her in that picture. She had a little bit more of a beard. And was about this tall and hunched over. And it sounded like Yoda. But other than that, you think I'm kidding? I am not kidding. And I've told the story about how someone in the church thought it would be funny to buy her a little horn for her walker. Because, you think that's a funny little joke. No, she used it. She'd go marching through church on her little tennis balls. And I really did not ever want to claim that she was my grandmother, but they figured it out through some code. Because we brought her. But the reality is for a lot of people, family is a strange concept. In Hebrews 2, we talked about it. It says, but we do see Jesus, who was made lower than the angels for a little while, now crowned with glory and honor because he suffered death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. And bringing many sons and daughters to glory, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the pioneer of their salvation perfect through what he suffered. Both the one who makes people holy and these who are made holy are of the same family, so Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. It's important that we understand that the family is a central value when it comes to Christianity. It is a central value to everything that we believe. A good example is that Jesus himself chose to be born into a family. Right? He didn't just appear in the temple one day. He didn't have the great dissension. Ascension. Thanks for all those with religious education. Staying with me. We didn't have that. What we had was Jesus was born into a family. Jesus was a part of a chosen people. He chose to be a Jew. He chose to be akin to people. Joseph and Mary continued to have children. It didn't just end there. Most of us would have ended there. Right? Well, I'm not going to get any better than that. So, and being his little brother and sister must have been awful. Right? Why can't you be more like Jesus? And see, it's not just, they were the first ones to say, well, ask yourself, what would Jesus do? You think you think that's an obnoxious phrase in your life. Imagine that for little Joe Jr. Right? It must have been brutal. There had to be a Joe in there. But the idea is that he chose to come to earth through that conduit. He chose to come to earth through that ability to relate. He didn't just appear. And so he doesn't really distance himself from family. And as the church, we should never distance ourselves from family. We should never pull away from it. We should never not like the idea of it because Jesus himself chose that. But at the same time, Jesus also picked family to sort of be the topic of some of the harshest things he ever said. In Luke 14, he says, large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. That's one of the harshest things he ever said, and one of the hardest things to talk about that he ever said. How many of you guys knew he said that? And how many are going, did we come in the wrong church? Yeah, where's the Grace Church? But those are the kind of things that he said. It's very difficult. He also says, over in Matthew chapter 8, another disciple said to him, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. Seems like a fair request. And he says, follow me and let the dead bury themselves. Let the dead bury their own. So if we take the time, obviously, and spend a little bit of time in the context and understanding what Jesus meant when he said these things, we have to remember that Jesus was never shy about the truth. I think we are in a PC environment where we like to say things in a way that makes people feel okay about their circumstance, okay about the things that they're doing. We want to make sure that we don't alienate anyone through, harsh lingo. But Jesus was aware of the fact that there were a lot of people that were just sort of grabbing onto him to enjoy the fame that went with walking with Jesus. And like the book that's become very popular, is there were a lot more fans of Jesus than followers of Jesus. People that wanted that sort of, I'm going to go walk with the man who does miracles by the sea. I'm going to go spend time. And so Jesus a lot of times had to be very strong with them. He had to be very pointed in the words that he chose, because a lot of those people had very poor self-awareness. They were in it for all the wrong reasons. Maybe they didn't know it. We'll give them some credit. Maybe they weren't aware of it, but Jesus himself had to speak so directly to them and say, I'm sorry, what you're looking for is not what I'm offering. I'm not offering a life of fame. I'm offering a very difficult life, and you don't want any part of it, because I know you're here for all the wrong reasons. And we do have a lot of Christians that have a little bad spiritual self-awareness. We think that we're Christians when really what we really like is the comfort and the security of the church, and this whole idea of, I'm going to be a Christian so I get heaven, provides, when the truth is maybe we're not really disciples. So, getting back to family, when we talk about family, we know there are a lot of trappings that come with it. And there's a lot of hurt that can come about because of it. But this morning we're going to talk about the kind of family the church is supposed to be. The kind of family that the church is supposed to encourage, the kind of family the church is supposed to look like. And so we're going to take a look at Galatians chapter 6 and talk about really a great example of how the family should act. Starting in verse 1, it says, "Brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves so that you're not tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone thinks they're something when they're not, they deceive themselves. Each one should test their own actions. They can take pride in themselves alone. Then they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else. For each one should carry their own load. Nevertheless, the one who receives instruction in the word should share all good things with the instructor." I just threw that one in there for you. That last one's free. But anyway, Paul starts his passage with brothers and sisters. You know, in the old church, in the old days, that's what it used to be, right? There's brother so-and-so, sister so-and-so. You know, it was very common to call each other brother and sister. But he calls them brothers and sisters to remind them, okay, hey, listen, hey, family. Hey, everybody who's in this thing together. Hey, everybody who's got that common link. We talked about family being something that had a common link. And he says, okay, so everybody who is a part of this family with me, I want you to pay attention. He says, I want you to take someone who's caught in sin, and I want you to restore them gently. He says to restore them, not to discipline them. Discipline is a facet of restoration, but it is not restoration in its entirety. He says, I want you to restore. He says, I want anyone who's caught in sin to be restored in a gentle manner. He does not say anyone who confesses sin. He says anyone who's caught up in it, anyone who is controlled by it, anyone who has allowed sin to become a part of their life. And so he says, I want you to take them, and I want you to restore them with gentleness. Now, restoration is defined as something to be put back into an earlier state or to return something that was lost or taken. And that is a great way to talk about family. It's like those holiday movies. You know, every holiday movie has the same formula, right? It's a total chaos, everything's falling apart, it's destined for disaster, and then somehow at the end everybody remembers it's all about family. Right? And somehow all the stuff that happened the previous week is forgotten. Everybody loves each other at the end, the fire is burning, good things are taking place, the chestnuts are roasting, and everybody's happy again. Every holiday movie is the same way. That is the formula for a good holiday film. It's amazing how quickly when people get back to what the true core, what really matters, when they get back to it, it's amazing how much stuff they're willing to forgive and forget. And that's the idea, the basic idea of the holidays, and that's why so many people have it, such a great remembrance of it. So Paul says that when they are caught up, when they are caught in their sin, we need to return what was taken or lost, and to do it with gentleness. The church has to be a gentle family. The church has to be gentle with itself. It has to take the time to make sure that it is careful with the restoration process. Being willing to look beyond, the mistakes, look beyond the actions, but toward a value of protecting each other and caring for each other when things are the most difficult. It's interesting to me, one of my favorite things about the church has always been how certain sins come with a certain requirement of satisfactory penance. What I mean by that is if you stole some money, no leadership for 6 months or change churches, right? We have a certain thing. Adultery, you're out for 2 years, right? You cannot be involved. We have this idea of everything has a certain amount of time then that we put on it. But that's not really how Christ operates, and that's not really what Paul's saying. Paul says our goal should be to restore them. And so when repentance is authentic, we know that Christ is faithful to forgive, and whatever Christ restores is restored. Whether we want to think it is or not, whether we feel it is or not. The minute genuine repentance takes place, and what's the problem with genuine repentance? How many of us know if it's genuine? None of us do. Right? So we have to put our faith in Jesus, which is just not natural. Right? So the idea is it's not up for us to oversee the restoration to our satisfaction, but to rather to know that our goal is not to be a hindrance to the restoration. A lot of times human beings are more of a hindrance to that which Christ seeks to restore than we are a help. I think the church has for a long time been more comfortable with embarrassing people than with restoring people. But Paul says that I encourage you to restore with gentleness. Anyone who's caught in sin, and nowhere does he say only if it's minor sin. Because like I said, we have a hierarchy, right? Greed, that's really low on our sin scale. Lying is a little bit, it's bad, but it really depends what you lied about, right? And then we work our way up to the big-time moral sins where we prefer to just spiritually execute you. But there's this idea that we would rather kind of embarrass to a certain measure whatever we deem an acceptable amount of embarrassment than restore. But Paul says nowhere does he say that it's based on the quality or level of your sin. He says anyone caught in sin, all who are caught in sin, it is your job to restore with gentleness. And then he says something that has been very core to the church family for a long time. He says we are to carry one another's burdens. Now, carrying one another's burdens is kind of a cliched idea in the church. We talk about it all the time. Let's bear one another's burdens, right? We bear is a better word because it's the original English. But we like the term, right? Bear one another's burdens. And so, talking about what it means to define burden. Burden is defined as something that is carried or something oppressive or worrisome. So, something that is carried, oppressive, or worrisome. So the reality is a burden is basically anything that has to be moved manually, that has to be cared for. You have to make a decision to carry it. Now, the church has been talking about bearing burdens for millennia. But let's looking at the definition of burden, we understand that first off, a burden has to be carried. It has to be lifted. It has to be moved along on our path of life, our journey in life. As we walk down the road, we have to pick up our burden. We are saddled with lifting it. Anybody who's ever, really worked through lifting some of the heavier objects in life, we understand what it means to be a burden. When we're carrying, when I watch the World's Strongest Man, they have to carry the Africa stone. It's 400 pounds of stone, right? And it's amazing when you watch one dude just walk up and grab it and start walking with it. It would be less impressive if it was two dudes. You know what I'm saying? We'd be like, oh, well, if he's getting help carrying that burden, it's not that big of a deal. It would be cool if they just grabbed two dudes from the crowd to carry it against one dude who was a competitor. That would be pretty sweet, right? Okay, we've got, these two guys from the crowd, they're going to compete with Magnus, insert last name. And then there they go. And so that's actually Magnus Samuelson. So there they go. That would be interesting. But the idea of watching the world's strongest men carry, a stone together would take some of the joy out of it, because the reality is a burden, we find ourselves very impressed with the amount of burden that you can bear, with the amount you can carry. The second thing is not only do you have to carry it, but it's defined as worrisome. I think most of us would accept that definition. When we think of worrying, it's my burden to bear, it's my cross to bear, is more of a Christian thing to say than my burden. But this idea that it's worrisome. My marriage is in trouble. I'm struggling. That's worrisome. We don't have a problem sharing that most of the time. The idea that it's I'm struggling in my marriage. I'm not sure about my job situation has become a very common one in the U.S. because people change jobs so commonly now. I'm not sure about my job or my career or my purpose. And so the church comes alongside and we lend a helping ear. We listen to what they have to say. We're kind. We slap them on the back, whatever it takes. The church is good at that kind of assistance and care. We're told all the time that family would care and spend time with each other's burdens. And that a family member might even come alongside and pick it up for a short amount of time. But really what carrying the burden is that we're called somewhat like Simon the Cyrene to actually pick up the cross of Christ and carry it for him in its completeness. It doesn't become a teamwork thing. Jesus had reached a point physically where he could no longer carry it, and so he fell. And so Simon picks it up and carries it for him. The reality is, he doesn't just carry part of it. He actually lifts the burden in its entirety and carries the weight of the cross for him. That's the reality. It's your monitor. But that's the thing, is we hear those. I don't know if you guys can hear that.
What do you...
Yeah. All right. So that's the thing is we can understand that Simon carries the weight of that in its entirety and not basically sharing it, because Paul says we are to carry each other's burdens. We've always taken that as a teamwork or an assistance thing, but in many cases, a lot of times, it's carrying it in its entirety. And then we're told that a burden is anything that's oppressive. Oppressive is an oppressive word. It's a difficult word. When we sit and we talk about the word being oppressive, oppressive is a weight that just sort of sits on you and crushes you slowly. Oppressive isn't like a quick thing. It's a slow, mounting, heavy thing that starts to grind on you and push you down and weigh you down and wear you out. It slowly takes the air out of your lungs as it squeezes you underneath its weight. And it takes you close to that point of death. The proximity of death is what it feels like. And it's a horrible thing, the word oppression, to be covered by something that's oppressive. And the reality is that most of the time a burden is something that is oppressive to people. And the truth is, even in a church our size, there's a good chance there are many people in here today who are sitting there with a burden in their life that is oppressive, that is crushing them, that is handicapping their ability to exist and to move because of its weight. And the reality is, there's a lot of us in here. And so then those things, they begin to change who you are, those oppressive burdens, and then they begin to fill you with worry, concern, and depression. It takes time. It grinds on you. So let's go back to, now that we've talked about what a burden is, go back to its context, because context in all things determines meaning. So what is the point of carrying each other's burdens? He says, brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves so that you might not be tempted. So the context of burden sharing is to restore anyone caught in sin with gentleness. And that we should keep a watch over ourselves so that we're not tempted. So before he tells us to share burdens, what does he say? He says, watch out and help your brother who's struggling with sin. So the reality is, a lot of times the burden we are called to carry for another is helping them with what? The oppressive weight of their sin. Oh, it's the drums. It's Drew. It's the oppressive weight of sin. And so, he tells us that a large part of that burden bearing is carrying the weight of sin. Because that's exactly what Christ did for us. Because if you look at the verse that directly follows, carry each other's burdens, what does it say? And this way you fulfill the law of Christ. So if you are going to carry each other's burdens, if you are going to carry that weight for them, you only then do you fulfill the law of Christ. So getting back to sharing burdens as a family, historically we've talked about this verse as though it's sharing in pain or sharing in loss or sharing in difficulty, which that's part of it. But truthfully, it's a whole lot more than that. It's basically helping lift that oppressive weight off someone, that weight that's grinding them into the ground. It's lifting that thing that's pushing them down. But sometimes, you know what? Oppression, sometimes it's neat and tidy. But a lot of times, oppression is just plain awful. Because Paul says, be careful so that you don't fall into what they're dealing with and fall into sin. I don't know about you, but being raised in the church, I was always raised with this concept of sort of vague imagery when it comes to bearing each other's burdens. I was always taught it was carrying a boulder, two men carrying a boulder up a hill, or two oxen pulling a cart instead of one. Right? It's so much easier in a team. A team of oxen can do so much more than just one by themselves. So if we all carry each other's burdens, look at what we can do together. Right? A team of horses is so much faster than one. And so we had this idea that basically that bearing each other's burdens was like some kind of after-school Christian cartoon commercial where it says helping. It's what the cool Christians do. And we had this idea that it was just sort of this way to make lighter work for everyone, right? Many hands makes light work. And so we had this idea that if you're struggling, we'll just come alongside and like a team of horses, we'll move toward the promised land. Now, the idea of providing a shoulder to cry on, the idea of being in that kind of situation is fine. There's no issue with it. But is that really what Paul's talking about? I mean, what happens if that oppressive weight that's crushing somebody is pornography? What happens if that oppressive weight that's crushing someone, that burden that they bear, is the sin of pornography? What if it's stealing life out from underneath them? What if it's crushing them slowly and crushing them into nothing? Aren't we called to lift that weight as well? It says, anyone caught in sin, restore them with gentleness and bear each other's burdens. So what happens if someone's caught in the sin of pornography? Aren't we called to lift that weight? Isn't that a burden? We can't just sit there and condemn, right? But that's what we can't just sit there and look over at them and go, well, they're having problems, right? We can't sit there and push them aside and say, well, that's not nearly as neat and tidy as this person's burden over here, right? I'm going to hang out with this person because their burden is something they didn't do to themselves, right? That's one of the Christian all-time ones, isn't it? Well, that was self-inflicted. Or we do this, right? We look at them over there and we think, oh my goodness, you're really dying slowly under the weight of that pornography. You're really struggling. So here's a friend of mine. Give him a call. He's a counselor. He's really good with pornography problems. Give him a call. Burden shared. Right? Well, I gave you a card for a counselor. I'm not diving into that with you, right? But that's what we do. What if it's because, I pick pornography because, let's be honest, it's not a pretty thing. It's a horrible disease that's crushing our country, that's destroying men's lives all the way down to their teen years. It's a horrible, gross, terrible thing, but it's a terrible burden and affliction that many men struggle with. So what if we're called to really lift that burden with men? What if we're called to really go over to someone who's dealing with that weight that's crushing their lives? We can't just go up to them and provide encouragement and go, it's okay. And that's not burden sharing. That's not helping them carry it. That's why Paul says this. Why does Paul say something as important as make sure you are filled with the Holy Spirit so you don't fall into sin? Make sure you pray, right? Because if you're a man and you're going to dive into a pornography problem with a man, you need to be prayed up. Right? You don't want to walk over and go, let me help you with that burden. That looks so heavy. Let me take care of it for you. Yeah, I'll let you know how things go. Got you covered. Hallelujah. Right? To where now what happens? Bro, someone needs to lift this burden off me. Right? Now all we're doing is just moving the burden along. That's why Paul says, make sure that you are people filled in the Spirit and you don't fall into that sin when you are assisting someone in their burden. It also means if you're dealing with someone who's dealing with those emotional problems, that's the same thing. So the only way, if someone is struggling under the weight of a burden of pornography, the only way is to walk over and lift it off of them. It is the only way to lift their burden, is to say, you know what, I see where you're at, I'm going to walk over, I'm going to do what I can. I'm not just going to instruct and carry, I'm actually going to pick it up, and I'm going to lift that weight with my hands, and I'm going to help you down the road with it. It's not some cool photo burden sharing of 2 oxen, right, and a team. No, it's one guy carrying another dude's porn. That's the reality of it. It's not pretty, but it's the church. That's the thing. But for a lot of us, it's no, we like the idea of that really cool imagery. It's better as a team. But a lot of times it's not. It's horrible. But that's what it means to carry each other's burdens, is we have to get involved in those things. Burden sharing is an ugly mess, rarely pictured well in the paintings we see hung in the church. It's a hard, horrible thing. Is there reward? Absolutely. Do we feel fantastic when we're helping people carry? Yes, we do. But it's not always easy. If the weight is enough to crush the life out of someone, why do we think we just pick it up and throw it? For a lot of us, it requires heavy, hard lifting. So how do we carry weight? Well, we provide accountability, love, direction. There's lots of ways that we can help carry the weight for someone. The reality is that all situations are different. If you just stand there and give it a blanket answer, it's hard. But so what do we say? Well, what if you're in a situation and you don't know how to help? Somebody does. Somebody can lift that burden off of you. As an opportunity to share. We're the family of Christ, and that's what family does. Family walks through the most awful things together, and most importantly, family walks down roads with each other that friendly will never go near. What I mean by that is this. Family will go through things with each other that friendly never would. Friendly stops at a certain point. Or we go down that road together on that road to that road of difficulty. It starts to get too tough. Friendly gets off the bus. Family stays on the bus. Family stays in it with each other. Family goes through some horrible things with each other. Family helps carry those difficulties. Kind of like the Via Dolorosa, right? Family walks down those roads. That road that he went down led my Savior, the one that calls me brother, to take upon himself all of my garbage. And he picked up my burdens. And he picked up my sin. And he forgave me. And that road led him to becoming the Lamb upon which all sins were cast. And the sins of which I had not yet committed. The sins he knew I would commit. He's forgiven me, he restores me, and he carries my burdens for me daily before the Father. So if I'm going to tell anybody I want to be a Christian, which means I want to be a little Christ, which means I want to be Christ-like, then the reality is I have to say, well, what can I do to help you carry those burdens the way Christ carries the burdens of my sin? Not just how can I help you in a difficult situation or how can I be a good ear, but how can I help you carry that garbage that is crushing you? How can I help you say, you know what, how can I come alongside and help carry that? I mean, that's the church, though. That's the law of Christ being fulfilled in our family, is that we look at each other and we never ostracize each other for difficulty. The minute we say, you know what, you have sinned too great, you got to go, you have now said to that person, I refuse to help you carry that burden. You have said, I refuse to restore you with gentleness. I refuse to go through those things with you. We are called to forgive each other. That's what family does in its perfect setting. Regardless of what family does, we're called to forgive each other. We are going to be called to go through certain measures of hell together. All families do. If your family hasn't been through hell yet, it's probably because, you're not old enough to know the difference. But once you get to be an adult, you realize families go through horrible things together. You go through difficulties together. You go through pain together. It's hard. You watch your family members fail. You see bad things take place. As a parent, you watch your kids fall down. You watch your kids get hurt. You go through things. And the reality is we are going to go through those things. But we have to walk over consistently as Christians, if we are going to call ourselves Christians, and pick up that burden that is crushing the people around us. We have to make sure that people aren't being crushed, that people aren't losing their breath, that people aren't being oppressed in our midst because they can't find the help they need. And it doesn't mean we walk up and we give them a card and say, celebrate recovery rules. That's fine. Go with them. You know what I'm saying? Go sit and celebrate recovery with them. Sit down and go, Lord knows I got stuff I need to recover from. So go, sit with them. It means taking them. It means driving them. It means going through whatever it has to do to help lift that burden. You know what? Sometimes when people make nasty, icky sin decisions, when someone has to come out and be honest and say, you know what, I screwed up, I'm addicted to pornography, you know what the biggest thing in the world they need to know is? That you still love them. And that you're not going to ostracize them regardless, and that you're not going to treat them like suddenly there's some kind of weird mess. You know, that's what they need to hear. Because let's face it, there's plenty of shame involved. But I tried to pick that one specifically because I think it's one that a lot of people struggle with, A, and struggle with being okay with, B. So the reality is that we have to say, you know what, that may be the most important thing they need is for somebody to say, hey man, I'll sit and listen to you. Not a problem. I'm not going to ostracize you because of it. And a lot of times that's lifting that burden off their shoulders for the first time. And saying, oh wait, I got a friend I don't have to be worried about shame with? Man, I don't have to worry about shame. Are you kidding? But we have those kinds of things. When we're recovering from addictions, for a lot of us, when you're coming out of some kind of addiction, a lot of times you just need to know somebody's going to be there for you even if you fall down again. That's the reality. Consistency wins the day. The ability to share in those burdens wins the day. It's not just listening. Actually, burden sharing is an active participation thing. We're not called to gather to worship every Sunday and then go live separately. We're called to worship and live together as the church. Which means we have to be constantly caring for each other as we go through it. We have this idea that somehow it's like, well, once you get out there, Monday through Saturday, you are on your own, and what happens in Modesto stays in Modesto. Churches in Riverbank, right? I mean, no, that's not how we function. We function as people who consistently are helping each other deal with things of our lives. And like I said, be careful how you determine, without using context, what something means. In this case, the truth is this: burden sharing is as much a part about lifting the weight of sin off of each other and helping each other get through it and helping each other get over it and move past it and become, holy in the eyes of Christ, forgiveness, genuine repentance. But that's the reality. We have to share in those things together. And that's when people who come from the outside will say, man, that's a great, friendly, fantastic church. Why? Well, because they're so generous with Christ. You should hear their worship. They really are authentic in what they say and do and the things that they hear. And man, the other thing is, dude, I went in there and I just dropped a bomb on them and they were cool with it. I mean, that's the reality of being a hospitable, friendly, oriented family church, is that family said, man, let me help you out with that. I'm not going to leave you alone with it. I might be limited in what I can do, but I can at least help carry the weight. I can lift it off of your chest for a little while and let you breathe, by the words I say and the time I give you. So that really is, to me, the most healthy and functional representation of the church, is a church that follows what Paul says in Galatians chapter 6. A church that lives according to that. So let's close in prayer. It's already a little late. So, Father God, we just thank you so much for this morning. God, we just pray for our upcoming Thanksgiving week, for those who are traveling, for those who are dealing with their annual family that comes into their lives once a year. God, I just pray for peace. I pray for wisdom. I pray for discernment in our discussions. I pray for a great, healthy week for everybody. Father, I pray for an opportunity for ministry within our families this week. It's an opportunity to share the things that you have done in our lives this year and to share those things proudly. God, I pray that we can be open and receptive to the burdens that other people are dealing with. For some of us, maybe it doesn't come supernaturally to be sensitive. God, I pray that you can really bring that into our lives and allow us to open our hearts, open our ears, open our eyes to things that are going on around us, so that we can be better vessels of your ministry here on earth, God. That we can bear each other's burdens, that we can deal and restore with each other's sin, restore each other from sin with gentleness, making sure that we don't chase anybody by how we treat them. So, Father, I just pray all that in your name this morning. Amen. All right, you guys are supposed to have a good Thanksgiving. Eat turkey only if it's deep fried. Because any other ways to go.